I think all of our hearts go out to the family concerned with, 15-year-old being so tragically killed on our streets on her way to school. Now, the reality is that even within the school gates, there is a problem of violence around the carrying of offensive weapons. The reality is that, this is the party of government, and from our point of view, you always speak to the party of government. You always seek to have engagement and dialogue in order to make life better for our members, but of course, on behalf of our members, to make life better for children and young people. So we're here engaging, talking about our members' priorities, our members' agenda around how this government can fix the problems that have been created over the last 13 years.
And do you actually feel welcome?
I hope so. I mean, they've taken our money. They're happy for us to be here. The reality is, are we going to get the kind of quality engagement that we would want to see? I think from rank and file party members, we will see that engagement. In terms of what's happening in the parliamentary party, in terms of what's happening with the Secretary of State, and indeed around the cabinet table, has that engagement been genuine and meaningful over time? No, it hasn't been.
Right, okay. Now, we were speaking to Michael Gove earlier on, who, as you know, at the start of the Tory period was Education Secretary. I was saying to him that there is a general perception that public services have deteriorated over the last 13 years. His reply to me was, schools have got a lot better, education has got a lot better. What would you say to him?
Well, Michael Gove, bless him, inherited a world-class education system. That's the reality. We were on the global stage being praised for the quality of education, the quality of support for teachers, the high levels of morale. Teaching was the profession of first choice for graduates in 2010. By no measure has that improved. In fact, the situation has gotten markedly worse. The government can't meet its own targets for initial teacher training recruitment. We had record numbers of teachers leaving the profession prematurely last year. We have shortages right across the piece. That's what education is about. Now, teachers are working their socks off to deliver the best under very trying circumstances.
His argument was that standards have improved, that exam results are better, that more people...
Because of teachers, despite the government.
But you do accept that standards have improved?
I accept that our members are working extremely hard to deliver the best standards for children and young people, but at what cost? The cost to the profession has been profound. The cost to the profession in terms of their morale, in terms of their well-being. The cost to children and young people by not knowing if they're going to be taught tomorrow by a qualified teacher. Those are costs which frankly are too great to bear, and Michael Gove and indeed his successive Secretaries of State have got to take responsibility for that.
And is that really, after a period where we have seen industrial disruption, is that really a question of the amount of money going into the system?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that is about investment. If we look at the school buildings crisis, there's no doubt about it, that is about real hard cash, or at least the lack of real hard cash going into the system to fix our broken and crumbling schools. So the reality is that we do need to see greater investment, not just in bricks and mortar, but also in the profession, not just in teachers either, but also in the wraparound support for children and young people. There is a mental health crisis in our schools right here, right now. We've got children who are being referred for specialist support, who are having to wait weeks, months even, to be able to get that support. And of course, that is impacting on the quality of their education too.
How did you feel when Gillian Keegan made her comment about other people sitting on their bottoms and her doing a jolly good job?
Well, we've got one of our fringe meetings taking place shortly this afternoon, and I'm sure that I'll be speaking about, how we should be praising our teachers, but also questioning whether or not we should be praising more the Education Secretary for what she has done. The reality is, it doesn't matter how I felt about Gillian Keegan's remarks, it's what the profession felt about those remarks, because yet again, it was another slap in the face for the hard work work that's being done by teachers and head teachers the length and breadth of the country. And frankly, that was insulting to the profession. But you know what? I don't deal in personalities. I'm looking at policy. I'm looking at the impact of that policy. I'm looking at investment, and I'm saying, Gillian, it's not good enough.
She also said children love being taught in porta cabins.
Now, come on. This is 2023. We should not be reducing our expectations around world-class education to teaching children in porta cabins or in marquees. The reality of the matter is that schools are crumbling. And we need to fix the problem of our broken schools. That requires greater investment. And you know what? I've said to Gillian Keegan, she's done a huge amount to try and draw more money out of the Treasury for education. But she's facing a bit of an uphill battle because even more money needs to be drawn out of the Treasury to fix the problems of our broken schools right now.
Which might mean more tax paid by everyone.
Which means important choices for government to make about, tax, of course, about who's taxed, about how we're taxed, but it also means important choices about, whether or indeed austerity is good for Britain. It isn't.
Can I ask you about the impact this has on children? Because some people are very concerned about the number of children who are excluded or taken out of classrooms and essentially put into units where they are maybe not learning, they're not taught, and they eventually do leave the school system completely altogether. That problem has got far worse in recent years. How worried are you about that? And whose responsibility is that, really, to solve that problem?
Well, we're equally concerned about the issues around behaviour and exclusion in schools. In fact, earlier this month, in fact last month, we're into October, we published evidence from a nationwide survey on pupil behaviour. And what that identified was that the problems around poor pupil behaviour, physical violence, verbal assault, are on the increase. Now, teachers are struggling to deal with that. They're struggling to contain that problem. Why is it being left to teachers to contain that? Because often the services for children and young people, that early intervention and support, that SEND assessment and support, that access to child and adolescent mental health services and support, that connection between individual schools and other agencies, whether that be health, social care, or indeed other schools, frankly has fallen away. So what we're saying is actually this is a systemic issue. It's not an issue about what's happening in an individual school. It's a systemic issue which requires government to act.
And the government has put mental health support into schools.
Not enough.
No, and I think there is a call from campaigners for far more, and it's going to be extended, that scheme, in the coming weeks and months. Some of that support is making its way into schools. I suppose I'm asking you about the role of teachers, because there is a role here, and there is a real worry that these pupils are just dropping off the register. And because we don't have any way of tracking them, they get lost in the system. And that's surely not good.
No, absolutely. It's outrageous that we're in a society where...
But I suppose what I'm asking you is there a responsibility here for teachers too? I hear all of your arguments about the wider responsibility, but is there something that head teachers and teachers should be looking to themselves on this as well?
Yeah, there are two things going on as well within the system post-pandemic. One is that hundreds of thousands of children never returned. And you can't hang that on individual schools to fix. The government made decisions about closing schools, reopening schools, closing schools, reopening schools, which frankly sent us all in a spin. And frankly, it sent out a message there about the importance of school attendance.
You think it undermined it?
I think it has undermined it. So that's one issue. The second point, which I think is where you started, was the issue of school exclusions in relation to behaviour. And of course, there isn't a head teacher in the land, none of our members that I ever speak to think about exclusion as being an answer, seeing it as a fix, seeing it as, somehow a positive. It's always seen as a negative because head teachers are saying, we want to keep those children in schools.
So you don't think they're reaching for it too quickly as an answer?
Absolutely not. The issue is, how can you create a package of support for children and young people who may be at risk of exclusion? And quite often, that package of support simply isn't there. It's left to the individual teacher in the classroom to contain the problem. And frankly, that isn't about providing education to those children either.
How much of that problem is violent now? How much of it is about knives and about children attacking other children? I mean, we've seen an incredibly tragic case earlier this week in Croydon. That's now not as unusual as it once was. How big a problem is violence in schools?
regrettably, it is a problem in schools, and I think all of our hearts go out to the family concerned with a 15-year-old being so tragically killed on our streets on her way to school. Now, the reality is that even within the school gates, there is a problem of violence around the carrying of offensive weapons. And I know that many head teachers are trying to work very hard to address those issues. We're working with our members in schools. We're also talking to the government about what more can be done in that space to support schools in dealing with that as an issue. Violence, our members said in our behaviour survey, has increased significantly over the course of the last 12 months. 40% of teachers are saying that they have experienced or witnessed physical violent assault in their schools. That's serious.
Do you have any teachers asking you for stab vests, protection?
We have had that being raised. I wouldn't say that it's the generality of our members that have raised that as an issue. Whether that be stab vests, whether that be body cams. This is part of a discussion which is taking place. But there's a dynamic and there's a relationship between teachers and pupils which is fundamental, which we don't really want to change, which is ultimately one which is built on trust. It's built on mutual respect. And we think that's an important part of the way in which schools should be functioning. If we reduce this to how do we deal with an individual pupil that may be carrying a weapon and say, well, we need to legislate for that, we need to arm our teachers, we need to give teachers stab vests, we need to give teachers body cams. Well, what are we doing for the other 29 kids in that class who frankly want to get on with their learning in an environment which they feel is supportive and caring? I don't think that does any favours for the generality of pupils. What we need is better support for those children and their families who are at risk.
Patrick Roach, thank you very much indeed. Patrick Roach there, the General Secretary of the Teaching Union NASUWT.